Today, our lesson is about Jesus and his three disciples on the mountain. And we'll see what happened on top of the mountain. And a little bit about these three disciples. And there was an important message that Jesus wanted them to get. And it's a good one for us too. This is from Matthew chapter 17, verses 1 through 9. And it's also in Luke 9, verses 28 through 36. And I got into a study about this. I'm like, do I really know enough about what happened in this important biblical account? And so I got into some study, and it was some beautiful, beautiful stuff. And I love when the Bible, we'll talk about it here, and we talk about it there, and it just all comes together in the same day. It inspires me when the living word comes out that way. But this is a tremendous event that happened, and I actually want to study it a little bit more. And I love how when I know a little bit about a biblical account, and that I don't call it stories. These are not stories. This is actual events. I know a little bit about it, and then I go back over it, and I really get a little bit more and a little bit more, and I just love it how it's the living word. It's just incredible. So, but we are going to talk about what happened, the perspective, and these three men, and why Jesus wanted them in particular. When we did junior church today, we started off with playing a game. I forget what they call it. Anyway, I heard a lady talk about it. She's from England, and in England they call it Chinese whispers, but it's where you whisper something into one person's ear, and then the next person, and then by the time it gets to the last person, it's a whole different message than what was said. And so I separated all the youngins, and I whispered to one, and I said, "I like pickled pepper pie, and so does my dog Ralph." And it got back to, and it ended with something dog. So they remembered the dog. But so we're going to talk about the message that was so incredibly important to hear. And then Jesus said something. After one message was given, what was the very next thing that was said? Because we want to get it, and it's God doesn't usually repeat it twice, so that when our response shouldn't be, huh? So anyway, we had a good time with this message. So it had been a busy, busy day. Jesus was tired. We talked about how Jesus was, he had a human fleshly body. He got tired. He got hungry. He had human emotions. Jesus cried. He felt all the things that we feel, and yet he was also the Son of God. So he was sinless, but he took on the form of a fleshly man. So amazing. Don't get me started on that. So it had been a busy day. Jesus was tired. He had walked to many places. We talked about how they did not have carriage rides. They didn't have a bus. He couldn't take a plane. So he had to walk. That alone would make you tired. And then all the needs that he met along the way. People who were blind, and he opened up their eyes. People who were lame, and he healed them to walk. Cast out demons and all kinds of things. So to me, I'd rather be physically tired any day than to be emotionally and mentally tired. So he was both. It had been a long day, to say the least. So he had stopped to talk to people about God's love. He had made sick people well. Now evening was coming, and he needed to rest. The disciples were tired too. They had walked along with Jesus all day. There was something Jesus wanted to do. And I told him sometimes with my son, before you go to bed, can we do this? And then, that and this and that. Because I will go from A to B in the house to do one thing, and I'll do 6, 7, 8 things on the way, and then all the way back. So Jesus had one more thing he wanted them to do before they went to rest. he wanted Peter, James, and John to go with him. So they're following him, and across the fields Jesus led the 3 disciples. Then they began climbing a mountain. We talked about how when you're tired, probably the last place you want to go is on top of a mountain. But Jesus started going up the mountain, and so did Peter, James, and John. And we talked about, when we discussed in the Old Testament especially, we'd always talk, one, about the persons that we're talking about, the character. What does that show us about God? And how does that apply to me today? But especially in the Old Testament, there's so many lessons about, I don't have to understand it. I just have to do it. I just have to follow what God tells me to do. So they're following Jesus up this mountain. And if it was just to pray, we could have prayed down there. And so we talked about some of the things that they probably moaned and groaned all the way up there. My legs are tired. And then, why are we going up there? We could have just this. A lot of times, and when I said that, I thought about, you know what, there's so many times in my life where I'm sure that I'm guilty of saying, God, you could make this easier for me. We could do it. So I'm telling God how we should do it, when actually I'm just supposed to, there's God, here we go, this way, don't get it. My mind don't have to comprehend it. My emotions don't have to be along with it, as long as my feet keep going. So across the fields and up the mountain, poor Peter, James, and John, they were already tired from their busy day. Why, they wondered, is Jesus taking us up this mountain? He is tired, and so are we. What could be so important that he has to climb the mountain? Jesus clearly had a reason for why he wanted to go up there. Jesus had taken Peter, James, and John with him before. And they had gone with him when he went to the home of Jairus to make his daughter well. The 3 disciples loved Jesus. They liked to be with him, but now they wanted rest. Up the mountain they went. Finally, Jesus stopped. "We will stop here," he said. Peter, James, and John sat down on the ground to rest, but not Jesus. Jesus took a few more steps away, and Jesus knelt to pray. And this isn't the only time that Jesus went to the mountain to pray. He had told his disciples, get in the boat, go on across the other side, and I'll meet you there. He went up to a mountain to pray. He needed some alone time. And if Jesus needs alone time to get some prayer, he needs some alone time with God the Father, certainly we do as well. That might not be, you might not have to climb a mountain, but you might have to go in the bathroom and shut the door if you got some little ones. And a lot of times, moms, that does not work. So you might have to go into a closet. The cleaning closet, they'll never come in there, I promise. But Jesus needed some time alone with his Father to pray. So he's praying, and the 3 disciples listened to Jesus pray to his Father, God in heaven, and they too began to pray. And as they began to pray, they began to get sleepier and sleepier. And suddenly, like, my eyes are already closed. Let me just, okay, yep, and God. And we talked about how I personally have trouble praying. When I'm teaching, I go on all these, that leads to this, and I go down this rabbit trail. It all applies, and it's all good points. But I can go on so many rabbit trails with things. That happens to me in my mind when I pray as well. So it's easier for me sometimes when I write down my prayer. So I talk to God, I write it down. It's easier for me than to just stay in my mind, because I have a whirlwind of thoughts going around my mind all the time. It's like grabbing at them. So it's difficult for me to pray. So I just write down people's name, and I just look at them, and I say, God, please, I lift them up to you. I don't know what they need, but you do. But especially at night, I start off praying, and then before you know it, I'm probably snoring. I've never stayed awake to make sure, but I probably snore. But anyway, I start off praying, and I end up a lot like them. Start off praying. I'm in this with you, Jesus. Yep, in this. Yep, yeah, I'm with you, Jesus. Yep. Oh, yep, Jesus, I'm praying. I got this, and it drifts off. But they were too tired. They fell asleep as Jesus was praying. So they soon fell asleep. And, we talked about, I alluded to, this is how I get them in junior church, is I'll kind of work it up, and I'm like, I'll tell you about that next week. I told them about Paul Harvey, which they had no clue who Paul Harvey is. But, and I love how see, another rabbit track. I love how when I'm teaching about something, that my mind goes to somewhere else. And I thought about the same scenario. This is the first of another scenario just like this. When Jesus says he brings his closest friends, the people who are with him for all these things. These three men are the only ones who got to see what they saw. And I love this. They were also with him in the garden. And Jesus went to pray. And he asked him, please pray with me. Jesus was struggling when it came to and he got, Father, if there's any other way than the cross, please give me that way. Nevertheless, I'm going to burn into a piece of wood the words, nevertheless. He said, nevertheless, your will and not mine. He was in agony over this, what he was about to have to do and what he was about to have to suffer. And he asked his disciples, please pray with me. And they weren't able to keep up with him. So they were in the scenario again. But Jesus is there. He's praying. They fall asleep. And suddenly, Jesus continued to pray. And there were many things that he wanted to say to God. Suddenly, a bright light from heaven came down. And it shone all about Jesus. I can only imagine the sight. I don't think the best artist in the entire world could ever show us really what Jesus looked like there. John tries to describe what he saw in Revelation, but I don't think that no one has the articulation to write it, and no artist has the ability to draw it. I mean, what they saw this day, what they saw, it was completely different than just this plain old Jesus that they had been walking with. They saw something incredibly different. This light was all about him. The sleeping disciples, we talked about how sometimes you're deep asleep and somebody opens up the shade, the light comes in and you're like, ah. And so, but the light came on and these disciples saw Jesus in this form, and that'll wake you up. So they're now awake and they see Jesus in incredible way. The sleeping disciples woke up and they looked up and saw the bright light. Jesus was standing now. His face was shining bright as the sun. Even his clothes were shining white as snow. The disciples were surprised and afraid. When they saw Jesus, then they saw Jesus talking to two men. Where's my two men? Men, where are you, men? When you need a man, there's never one around. No, sorry, rabbit trail. So they saw Jesus was talking to two men. And I had him go through, who do you think these two men are? I mean, hello, this is incredible. They must be pretty important people to be there and in this particular place, at this particular time, in this particular situation. So we had him guess through who they thought these were. But we finally came to the conclusion that he's talking to, this one we said is Moses, and that one is Elijah. So these two men were there. And one was Moses and one was Elijah. And but God, these two men were visitors from heaven. One was Moses. Long ago Moses had died, but God had resurrected Moses on Mount Nebo and taken him to heaven. The other man was Elijah. God had taken Elijah to heaven in a chariot without Elijah ever experiencing death. We talked about how cool that would be, to not even just to be Elijah from Elijah's perspective, but even just seeing that would be incredible. We talked about a little bit of Elisha and Elijah, and we talked about the things that Elijah did.